Okay, well, I'm here today with Dormain Drewitz, who is a product marketing manager in VMware in the Tanzu group. And Dormain was actually recently in the keynote at VMworld, very animated speaker. So I'm excited to have her here today for another Coffee with Bruce.
Cheers. Thank you.
So, Domain, first of all, product marketing covers a lot of territory, and as an engineer, I think it's often one of the most neglected aspects of the sort of the running of the business, but ultimately incredibly important because if you don't do a good job of product marketing, people don't know what your products do and may not even buy them. So, like, I love working with good product marketers. But I'd love to get your perspective on like how do you see the job, and in particular in the Tanzu group that you're in, what does that job actually look like?
Yeah, and I know from having to hire a number of product marketers over the years, it can feel sometimes like you're looking for a unicorn, right? You need someone who is versed in the industry and trends, and also can either already has familiarity with or can proven pick up the technology and understand the technology, not necessarily at an engineering level, but at a level to the point where they can in turn explain it, right? Because at the end of the day, I think a big part of the job is translating what this product does into what value it represents. And in order to have that value conversation, you need to understand what's going on the part of buyers. What are they struggling with? What is their pain point? How do they work and buy technologies? And then you also like that kind of brings in, well, if you're going to be an explainer, like you need writing skills, presenting skills,
One of my passions.
yeah, like you're bringing in a lot, and so that's it. Also, I think makes the job really fun. You're behind the scenes, also working really closely with the rest of the marketing organization as they're thinking about what are we doing from a branding perspective, and web and digital and our campaigns to make sure that those connect back with what the product actually does. Because where you start to run into challenges, or I find it frustrating when suddenly the campaigns and the billboards are like, what does that even mean? Like, how does that reflect what we actually do? So product marketing helps solve that, and in many ways proxy for the product team into those conversations, knowing how those conversations work from this is how campaigns get run, and here's how branding decisions have to work, and so be a voice in those conversations.
And what would you say are the kind of unique challenges when we're in the business to business software market, really? So it's, you're not trying to market to consumers, but you're particularly in the world where developers are a key market. So how does that all work?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that, because it is a good point where I can claim really no knowledge or expertise in how product marketing would work in a consumer field. And frankly, it's terrifying. I find consumer behavior like baffling much of the time, right? It's trends and, like that's not logical. I think in the B2B side, plenty of salespeople will correct me that there's lots of politics and emotion in how these decisions get made, but there is a little bit more of a process and a logic to it. And so you're appealing to building kind of a case and an argument, if you will, not at the individual account level, but one that sort of broadly represents what this product does. And again, coming back to that, telling that value story. And then, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got sometimes you have companies that they're really dealing with a very limited number of buyers, and they don't have to tell that story at a broad layer. And my husband worked at a company like that in product management, and he and I have talked. It's like he really did all the things that I do. It's just that he had so few customers that they needed to sell into. He just went into all those meetings himself, right? He didn't need to prepare a messaging document and materials and then arm a big sales force, right? It was a small focused sales force. He could handle all those really himself, and it gave him a lot of direct feedback as well, which is very valuable, but it doesn't scale. That only works, like in his case it was the auto manufacturers, and there's just a pretty limited number of those.
And now your background is pretty interesting. Obviously, you've spoken about your love of history in other forums. So can you tell me like how you went from being a history buff, which I guess you still are, to being a product marketer?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those like, well, that makes total sense now that you've explained it. So yeah, I got my degree in history. I fell in love with studying history in high school, and I had the benefit of my father being a business school professor. So any of our interns that come in from Berkeley, it's like, did you take Professor Geyer's class? And then like, okay, just so you know, we're related, bud. the his perspective really taught me that, okay, what you study in undergrad probably it doesn't matter that much. So just kind of study what you love, and the rest will kind of figure itself out. Maybe you'll go back to grad school. But I ended up taking a job in the equity research department of a boutique investment bank. And it was an admin job at the beginning, phones, travel, expense report. But there was an opportunity from the get-go to, dip my toe into financial analysis and learning kind of what this world of equity research was about. So I did that and then ultimately found my way onto the team that covered infrastructure software. So, covering all these infrastructure stocks, VMware was one of them. I wrote the initiation report with my boss on it back in 2007. Oracle, VMware, Microsoft, Red Hat, all the kind of main players and some that have come and gone since. And there it's, again, that notion of explaining, right? In this case, it was explaining to investors. And you had your financial model that you had built, and that was driving, and translating really all this qualitative analysis that you'd done, some quantitative analysis that you could get your hands on, and translating it into something that would then be kind of useful in the market. But there was a lot of like writing the prose, right, around why do we have this point of view on this stock? Why are we changing our point of view on this stock? When we're, the initiation reports are very detailed to make sure that it's like we have an understanding of what's this market that this company is playing in, who are the competitors. So all of that really taught me about the software industry. I kind of fell in love with it, and there's a certain order to it that just appealed to me. And I think as I've kind of gone on in my product marketing career, particularly gravitating more and more towards developers and what they're working on, I think I connect a lot because at the end they're creatives, right? They're creating things, and I love that. And I think it gets kind of misrepresented out there with like, these sort of introverted and very cold calculating. And it's just like, no, at the end of the day, software and building it's a creative process. There just happens to be a lot of technical components and ramifications into that. So, I eventually kind of found my way from equity research over to doing product marketing at a company more from your background in sort of the networking side of things at Riverbed. And then 6 years ago, came over to Pivotal and looked at the data products. And, one thing about not having a technical background is you can kind of point me at whatever technology and I'll kind of go learn what I need to learn and continue to build on that depth as I encounter more questions and realize like, to explain the value better, I need to understand this better. So constantly coming at it from that perspective, as opposed to I'm going to go into a cave and become an expert in this one technology so that I can try to tell a story about it. That's never worked for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, you make a very good argument there for sort of breadth, right? That you can, if you've got breadth, you can easily go and dig into the next thing to get deep enough on it to do a good job of explaining it. But being sort of really, really narrow would make that much harder. And I think this is why I sort of love seeing people coming from different fields. And, recently I've been watching a lot of talks by Scott Page, who makes these great observations about the power of diverse teams and how you get better outcomes when people come in with different perspectives. And I think that sort of really plays out in the scenarios you're describing.
Yeah, I poked at that a little bit last year. VMware hosts a Women Transforming Technology conference in the spring. Spring in the Northern Hemisphere. It's the fall for you in Australia. But the theme last year was around kind of innovation and inclusion. And I try to come at it with like, you know what, I'm going to be skeptical here. I'm going to just like say, prove it to me around this whole, does diversity and inclusion actually drive innovation? And I did a, very superficial, frankly, like by any academic standards, a review of some different arguments and cases and research that had been done out there, and kind of came to the conclusion that there is actually a pattern in how inclusive behavior does promote getting more ideas in. And at the end of the day, like when the ideas get stale is when innovation kind of starts to atrophy. So I hear you. I really tried to kind of poke at it and be skeptical.
Yeah, which is, I think, exactly the right way to go after it. But yeah, and Scott Page, I think, kind of went the same way. That he's a data scientist who just thought, well, this feels like it would be nice if it were true, but is it true? And let's go look at the data. And yeah, it's very compelling. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about history, because I actually was terrible at history when I was at school, and I got out of studying it as fast as I could. And I think it was just something that kind of, I didn't understand how to do it. And I've really enjoyed getting sort of back into studying history. When I say study it, I mean, I read, popular history books now. And, I guess one of my favorites would be Guns, Germs and Steel by Jared Diamond, where he does this thing, which I think I like to do a lot, which is you ask, why did something happen? And the title of the book is, Guns, Germs and Steel. It's the answer to the question, why did the Europeans manage to dominate the inhabitants of the Americas? But then he says, well, but why did the Europeans have guns, germs, and steel? And you keep on going back and back and back. And I think he asks why, many, many times, and gets back to really weird things like, well, it helps to have a continent that's oriented, east-west. So like, I love that kind of going back and back and back and asking why. So for me, history has become something I really read for pleasure in a way that I would never have imagined when I was much younger. So I wanted to ask you sort of, now that you're, many years out of studying history academically, how do you think history should be taught, and how do we get more people to engage with history? Because to me, it seems incredibly important that people do understand how history shaped the way we live.
Yeah, I mean, and like, I've talked to so many people who are like you. They hated history. It was their worst subject, or just the subject they didn't like. And it kind of felt like a bunch of, why do I have to memorize all these names and dates and be able to regurgitate them back or something? And it's interesting what you're describing with the kind of, why and why. You get all the way back to these sometimes arbitrary events, right? Like, it reminds me of how, the formation of what is modern day France goes back 1,000 years to, the Isle of France, and you had the Capetians dynasty, and they got lucky, right? Like, they had male heirs like 5 generations in a row who survived, and they were able to consolidate more and more land through marriages. Whereas, like, genetically speaking, that's statistically improbable, right? That you would have that kind of dynasty when you're relying on primogeniture and male heirs. And it's just like, fluke, right? Or, yeah. So that's how we have France, right? I mean, not really, but like, that kind of thing it happens, right? And the way history gets taught is often, from the beginning to now, and those kinds of questions sort of require working backwards, and that's just not how we teach history.
Yeah, there's a sense of kind of the inevitable march of history. It was always going to turn out this way, whereas, as you say, there's all these random things that shape it.
Yeah, and when you're moving forward, it can be kind of hard to fit in those details, because it's like, wait, why are we learning about this one family in France? Like, and the fact that they kept having boys. I don't know. It's like, that doesn't make sense until you're looking at it from the present, or from an important milestone, which could be 300 years in the future, but then something else changed. And so, it doesn't even make sense from a modern context. So I love it that, you agree that this is important and interesting and useful, but yes, we are challenged in how we bring people into it. And I made peace at a certain point with like historical movies and TV shows that just kind of get people excited and interested, and they paint a picture of the world that even if they didn't get it right, like Braveheart, like the actual ages between that French princess and William Wallace, like she was like 4 years old apparently. Like if you actually look, and it's just like, ew, gross. But it kind of works better in the story when she's like 20 and he's 30, and it's like, okay, that could kind of work. It's just like, but it got so many people excited, right? And I studied in Edinburgh. There were a lot of Braveheart fans there, right? And probably getting their heart broken when they actually go to where the Battle of Stirling was. And it wasn't on this big field where it was like, no, it was on a little bridge because it's a tiny Scottish force and this giant English army. And the only way they were going to win is if they funneled all those English soldiers through this tiny little bridge. And it's also like the whole place is like, my high school's bigger than this.
Yeah.
Right? So it was really interesting, but it just, the fact that it got people excited and brings them in, I've come to appreciate that's just, we need that, right? And like, you gotta set aside a little bit of the like, oh, it wasn't quite the right date, like, and just embrace it, because it's making it accessible to more people. Which, by the way, it's just, to come full circle, that's like, product marketing to me is sometimes about like, how do we make this accessible and get more people excited, bring them in, right? Get them under the tent. And it really turns a lot of people off when it feels like, oh, it's too techy, I don't understand, I have imposter syndrome. And it's like, okay, well, like, what if we break it down this way? What if we kind of make sense of it in a way that you can understand, as opposed to how the engineers imagined it, which sometimes doesn't line up.
That's a brilliant point, actually. First of all, it tells us why we need more historians in product marketing and other technical roles, I think. But also, like, this idea that you've got to bring people into the tent. I think there's so many people in the technology field who are like, I'm going to be the biggest expert on this so that I can show that I belong in the tent and no one else does. And like, that's exactly the wrong instinct, right? Because particularly if you're trying to get people to use your software, right, you need to bring people into the tent. So this idea of like, we need to find a way to make things more accessible. It's like, it's not just like the right thing to do morally, but it's actually like a really good business strategy.
Yeah, especially if you're in kind of the infrastructure, anything around like, you're not talking about an end user application, right? Like, yeah, there's always the screaming like, we need more developers, right? We have a shortage of technical staff. We need more data scientists. And it's like, okay, solve the accessibility problem.
Yeah.
Like, and by the way, try to get people excited, which I'm a big fan of, like, edutainment, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't try to pack in 100% of the information in a dry syllabus. Like, take the 50% and spice it up.
Yeah.
Because of the 100%, people are only going to retain 10 if it's delivered boring. You deliver 50% that's compelling and engaging and fun, and maybe you'll get 50%, right? You'll get all 50. So, like, you actually, I joke with folks, right, that there's only so much dopamine in the world, and I want more of it, right? I want yours, I want mine.
Yeah.
And if I can keep your attention and tell you a story and teach you something along the way, okay, I've done my job.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, look, that's been a really great discussion. I think we'll wrap it up here, but thank you so much for sharing your time and thoughts with us. It's been really fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
All right. See you soon.
All right, you too.
Perfect.